Hi there, this is Ruth Bradstreet here from Above the Tree Line. I'm the product manager for our Edelweiss Analytics tools, and today I'm going to give you a quick overview of our Edelweiss Plus Analytics for publishers. This is an extra Edelweiss module for publishers that gives you insights into the independent bookstore market and with additional tools to help your sales reps work better with their customers. And so basically, I'm going to get into a lot more detail, but at the sort of top level, it gives you three things, which is daily sales reporting, literally sent to your inbox, catalog and list analysis, we call it, which is just sort of ways of looking at your titles and slicing and dicing them in various ways as a group of titles or as a filter or just as your top selling titles. And then the key part really for reps is that this is all online. So they can go online, they can see things like this and you're seeing on the screen where they can really dive into their individual accounts and see what's going on at their stores. So as many of you know, analytics are nothing new to Above the Tree Line. In fact, retailer analytics was the foundational product for the company, which is actually over 15 years ago now. Now, hundreds of retailers now send their data feeds, which is sales, current stock, and their custom shelving codes to us every night. And we take all that data and give them back a view into their own inventory in the context of the other reporting bookstores. So they can see what's doing well at their peers that they might want to pick up, or they can see what kind of front list their peers are buying and find things that they may have skipped themselves. So there's a product for retailers which is similar, but they're kind of looking across all their titles and comparing to other bookstores, and it gives them a lot of information. And it also shows them sort of overall statistics about their store's performance by category, or really by anything. It could be by vendor, it could be overall. And this includes trends over time, so they can really easily target areas where they could improve turn, for example. And of course, turn is a really key measure of financial health of a bookstore. If they can't afford to own a lot of, well, they can't afford to own a lot of inventory that doesn't sell. So optimizing that while also taking into account their own mission as a bookstore or their focus as a store and the local market that they serve together is absolutely critical to the success. So since I mentioned all these bookstores, this is a point when somebody usually says to me, hey, Ruth, so how many bookstores and what kinds of bookstores? So here in the US, there are about, right now, 430 independent trade retail locations sending us data. Those stores sort of skew towards the larger general trade stores, but we do also have smaller and specialty, but it covers most of the stores that you would know about in the States. We also have about 150 independent Christian retail bookstores reporting as well. And in the UK, where we're just getting established, there's about 250 already stores that report sales and are using analytics themselves. So all of this data allows us to give stores insights into inventory management, but also, of course, can provide publishers with detailed activity about their own titles. So the way we think about analytics is kind of giving people the data they need to make good decisions, and we try to present it in a way that makes that easy. And these are kind of four aspects to it, and you can kind of boil it down to. You get basically a couple of different ways of seeing this data. First of all, you get an emailed report, daily reporting. So you get an email every day sent to whoever you want to the publishers that has a detailed listing of all of your books in Edelweiss and Edelweiss Analytics and how they're doing in the market. And that's actually a daily report that has daily sales, not only comes daily, but has yesterday X number of units of this title sold in the independent bookstore market. And then sort of it says title performance. So there's a few ways. Obviously that daily report gives you title performance, but also you can always go into Edelweiss, look up a title, see exactly what's happening with that title. So that's really great for front list books that have just come out and you're really eager to know what's happening when a week after a big title drops. You can get really up-to-date information on that. And store inventory, which is another key thing that doesn't come from other services that report sales, which is we also know what stores have in stock. So you can see not only what's selling, you can kind of see what's in the pipeline, what's out there in terms of the amount of inventory, or you can also see when people have run out of stock and sort of prod them to maybe get some more. And then the fourth thing that we kind of call it sales consulting, which is really the sales rep aspect of things, where they can go into a bookstore and have a bit more knowledge about their accounts because they're able to see into their accounts essentially, or see a lot more information about how their books are doing in that store, and have a bit more confidence in how they approach their accounts in knowing, understanding their inventory, understanding their sales, and what will do well for them and what won't. So, as I said, you can see real-time, well, almost real-time, on-hand, on-order, and sales data. Like I said, we get this data every night for titles across the nation. And this is an example of that daily email report. That top secret stamp is because we don't share one publisher's data with another, and this might be a good time for me to say that this is data on your books. We're not giving you data on other people's books. That's why sometimes these demos are a little bit hard to do. So you can't see those titles, but for this publisher, this is the kind of thing you get. So you'd see the week ending, the last 2 week endings, and the total sales in those weeks, and then the actual sales day by day, and then the current on hand and current on order out there in the marketplace. And you get that, like I said, in the body of the email, so it looks nice, and you get 3 or 4 different, you get a section for front list, sort of new, not quite so new front list, and then back list, kind of ordered by the top selling ones. But then you also get, if you want to ingest that into some kind of database, you also get a spreadsheet attached to this email that has everything kind of more of a raw data state that you can use for other things. And that spreadsheet also has a list of all the reporting bookstores as well, so you can see day to day who's a part of that. All right, so I'm moving on now to show you within Edelweiss what things look like. And this is a snapshot of the analytics page that you'd have access to. It looks a lot like the retailer one if you've ever seen that, but you get to see your titles sliced and diced based on the independent bookstore market and on a particular account as well. So a sales rep can pull this up. They can select from a list of their accounts. The pie charts are showing a store's sales and inventory, but you can also filter for almost anything. So you could filter for a particular imprint, particular format or category, and so on, and see all the same analytics on this page represented just for the titles that meet that filter. So most popular, for example, that very first lane, typically you or a bookseller would probably select the red piece of the pie, which are the books that they don't have. I'm going to talk about this in a bit more detail in the next slide, though. The second one is showing you front list titles that are coming out, so it gives people a picture of where, how strong people are in their orders on this particular store as well, which things they have ordered and which things they haven't. And then the third one is stock analysis. This is really not comparing to any marketplace, but showing that store's inventory, what they have of your titles, and how those titles are doing. So this part can give people, and all of this actually can give an idea of, not just what's selling well, but also kind of like really digging into the backlist as well. So the stock analysis here is showing you that 12%, and I'll talk a bit more about this metric, but 12% of this store's titles, of yours, I should say, are not doing as well. They're considered stale. That's the blue section. So those are things that you could, if you look at those titles, you may want to recommend some things for return, for example. And I know people don't want to hear about returns. Well, maybe recommend it for markdown, but this is actually really what it enables you to do is be more informed. Although as a rep you probably are about your account, but just have an in-depth information, and then you can feel a bit more comfortable, I think, recommending titles to bring into the store, especially if you kind of approach it as, hey, I recommend some titles to take out of the store, because then you're not really, other than the returns or the markdown cost, you're really just switching out something that's not working for the store. It's not that inventory is not doing anything, or maybe you're recommending things that are going to be out of print soon, that they really ought to get back in time, and replace them with just a few titles that they don't have to try out, because you'll get a sense for what the rest of the marketplace is doing with backlist, or new titles that they didn't pick up that are turning out to do very well. So you can feel a bit more confident. I think it's a bit more of a win-win situation because you're saving the store buyers some time and some work because they're trying to do the same thing. Obviously, they're not doing it publisher by publisher necessarily, though. All right, so to dig into these things, this most popular titles, I showed you a bit of that, represents what they're selling. It actually is taking the, in this case, is basing this on the top 200 titles that are selling across the market. And you can change that number. There's a settings little wheel there. You can change a lot of settings. You can change that to, say, up to 1,000. It can be a specific category, anything you want. And it's sort of a combination thing. It's going to show you the market information across the market. So it's basing this top 200 on the marketplace, but it's showing you this pie chart for a particular bookstore. So what you're seeing is this particular bookstore doesn't have 78% of your top selling titles. Now that might be because they're just a tiny little bookstore or they're a kids bookstore or something, but you can sort of browse through those and see if there's something that you really think that they ought to have. Because these are titles that are popular elsewhere, so why wouldn't some of those that are particularly popular elsewhere work well for them? The other segments you're seeing there are the ones that they do have and how they're doing with them. And this is something common across the site, and I'll talk a bit more about these colors, but essentially the light green ones are the freshest. So those are things that are turning well or they're selling actively. So you can drill into that group. And then there's a little sliver of blue, which I mentioned before is the stale. So those are, even of the top selling titles, they've got some that are considered stale. So they may be titles that were top sellers and they're kind of dying out a little bit. And again, you can kind of dig into that list and see what happens there. They may be just a little bit overstocked. The colors here actually do take into account stock. So it could be something that was overbought, still may be selling sort of steadily, but they just have too many copies. So to go, of course, you're probably wondering, from that nice pie chart, and you can scroll through all those titles, you can click on titles and see details, but of course you probably do need to see a list of titles. That would make sense. So this is just one title, but you can imagine you can click on the upper right when you're looking at this pie chart and just dive into the whole list of titles that are represented. So this is just one title showing in that list, and you'll see there are, I've blanked out what the actual title is, but that middle part has the bibliographic information about the book. And then I've expanded out the left-hand side, which is kind of some of the good stuff, where it says indie trade retailers, and this is this cross-market information. So that very first title in that little box is saying to me that this book has sold, now you can set a time frame for whatever you want, maybe a month or a year, but in that time frame of sales that you've set, 42% of these bookstores have sold that book. So if that's the last month, if it's say the last 2 months, and 42% of bookstores have sold this book in the last 2 or 3 months, then that's obviously a strong seller. It also has right below that the actual numbers, so 627 units have sold. We kind of like the percentage, well, both of those are useful, but the percentage is kind of a nice measure because it gives you an idea of how spread out and how broad the inventory or the sales of those books are. You could have thousands of units sold, but it was just one particular bookstore because they did a giant event or something like that. So seeing both of those numbers gives you that extra information. And in fact, that second book down says it sold 784. So it sold more units, but it's actually sold in fewer stores, only 39% of stores. And then the next column over is stocked. So this is telling me that 60% of, not of the ones that sold it, but of all 60% of all the bookstores have this book right now. So it's well represented. And that represents 491 units across those 60% of the stores. And then it's on order at 8% of stores. That number becomes much more interesting when you're looking at forthcoming books. And 126 units are ordered, and the average order is 3.6 for that first book. So you can really get a lot of information. And again, this is just market data, not really anything specific to the store. So you can sort by all these things and so on, and just say, I want to see the things that have sold the most number of units, or the least, or whatever. The next bit, I'm going to expand on this detail, is the right-hand side, which is the actual location detail, whatever store is selected here. So this is showing a few things. It's got shelf days, and this is tied directly to that metric that was making the pies. So the color, like the light green color, means fresh. And shelf days is a measure that we use that takes into account really how many copies are on the shelf, as well as how long they've been there since any activity. So if you've got a lot of copies with not much activity, they would have a really high shelf days number. If you have one copy that you can't keep in stock, it would have a very low one. So there's something in the middle that's ideal. But generally speaking, the green ones, the light green ones, are sort of doing quite well, and then the darker green are sort of stable. There's enough stock, but then the bluer ones were probably overstocked. And then in this case, there's a red one. You can see that third title down is red, and it's got 0 shelf days, which actually just really means that they don't have it at all. So there's a title where this is one of those. If this corresponds to the left-hand side, it's a book that's doing quite well across the market. And you might wonder why this store doesn't have it. And you may know enough to know that they really don't sell a particular kind of book, or they don't do well with fiction for whatever reason. But if you don't really see a good reason for them to not have a book, there's something for a recommendation list for them. So you're seeing that. You're also seeing their actual sales, again, the time frame, however you set it, and their actual on hand. So they've got 2. They've sold 2 for the first one in that recent time period. They've got 2 on hand. You can actually click on detail. I don't have a snapshot of that, but that little list beside it would actually pop out another window that would show you even more detail about this book at that store. And then what they have on order, the gap from the average order, again, probably more interesting for front list. And then their last sold date and their last received date. And then the far right, it shows their point of sale category. So this is their data. This is where they put it in the store. Which again is very useful for the bookstores. They do a lot of slicing and dicing by their own POS categories to see what's performing and what's not, essentially. But also useful for you, because if you saw this book and said, well, they've got this shelved in history, and this is really, I don't know, it's biography. It's always biography and something else, isn't it? But really, or it really is, great for YA. It's kind of YA kids book, history book, or something like that. You could suggest that if it looks like they're not selling this book as well as other stores are, you might say, you might want to try reshelving it over here, or putting it on that display table for something seasonal that it ties into, and so on. So sometimes the POS category is helpful. All right, so moving on to the next little pop-up here. Of course, you can perform actions. So you've got a list of titles here. If you're familiar with Edelweiss at all, you'll know that you can always kind of select titles and do things with them. So of course, that carries over to this part of Edelweiss too, where you can pick a few titles, pick all titles, and then add them to a collection, which in our terms is really just a list of titles. A sales rep could add to a collection and then put notes and markups on that collection and send it to a customer. So they could say, I recommend you pick up these 4 books, and maybe you return this one. Or they could just from here send an email of those titles somewhere to a customer, to them, to somebody in marketing, or whatever they want to do. Generate a PDF, so you can get a nice kind of pretty version of all the titles, or export to a file. And sometimes the file is really helpful, because you could take a big long list of these and get all of that detailed information into a spreadsheet to do other things with. You can also tag them. You can put, like I said, put notes on them. So there's a lot of actions that you can take from this place, and that's a big piece of what we want to do with the system, is to not just give ideas to people and sort of show them this data, but also allow them to do something about it. So say, rejigger a little category or something. Okay, so moving on to that next pie chart, what they have in stock. We've named this, and it's also stock analysis. And essentially, this is taking all of the books, well, unless you filter. So you could filter for fiction, you could filter for an imprint, but it's taking all of the books that meet the criteria within your titles. So it could be all of your titles that this store has right now. So this is not really comparing to markets, although it does when you get into detail, but it's the criteria for this list of books is what they have. So if you just want to know what they have, how they're doing with your books, this is the place to go. And again, it's divided up by the same kind of pieces. And this is one where we got the blue piece selected. So the 18%, the 21 titles are the ones showing here. And those are the ones that are staler. And you'll see that that first title has a fairly high number, which means there's maybe a few too many copies on the shelf, or there's one copy that's been there for years and years. It's one of those two things, the shelf days. You can also kind of see that what they have, 31% of your books, we call it that, are doing quite well, that light green piece. And then a chunk of them are doing fine. The yellow ones are ones that they don't have right now, but they do have on order. So, and of course, that same page, you can go into that list where I went through the details of that list. The exact same list is accessible. So you can still, even though you're looking at that store's inventory and what they have and what they're doing with it, you can still see that market data on the left-hand side when you go into the list. So you can see, instead of just thinking, well, I think this book is doing pretty well and they don't have it, or they don't, they're not doing very well with it. You can sort of, again, compare and sort of say, I wonder if this is, this is selling well at 80% of bookstores, or it's actually overstocked elsewhere too. So you can kind of validate that the rest of the market is acting a similar way or not, and that helps with those recommendations too. So front list, they have ordered. So this is going to look at, and you can change these dates, but essentially anything with a future pub date, and it's set right now to, this picture was taken a couple months ago, but from May forward. So right now it would be something like August, September forward, or just September, say, just show me all the our September titles that are coming out and which ones are the most ordered essentially, and which ones does this store have and not have, or have on order and not have on order. So this one's divvied up by a big chunk of them they don't have, and they don't have an order, 65% of them they don't. Now, it could be I've got it set to and later. Now, maybe this is capturing a season that's so far in advance that, of course, they haven't had time to buy them yet. That's why sometimes putting an end date on that could be good. But 65% of your forthcoming titles they don't have on order or don't have an order yet. And then a chunk of them, the yellow piece, they do have. So you can kind of browse through any one of those and, again, come up with some ideas for recommendations, and also see, because, again, this is like the top sellers where the universe of titles it's starting with are the ones that are selling in the marketplace. It's not really what's selling at that store, although those titles are divvied up into, or not selling, what's being ordered in the marketplace. So you can go up to 1,000. So what are the top 1,000 of our titles that are ordered, and you can see which one has the largest number of orders, and which one has the largest spread of bookstores that have it on order, or the opposite, of course. So once you dive into that, regardless of whether you're looking at one store, there's a huge amount of information about front list and what's happening. So the next piece we call sort of catalog analysis, and this is actually outside of that analytics page that has all the pie charts. There's one other place where you can get to a cool pie chart. Well, it's not one other place. It's actually kind of everywhere. So anywhere in Edelweiss, you can go to a list of titles and display it through this analytics type view. You can switch views from the regular catalog view where you see all the metadata about your titles to this kind of view, and you'll see the arrows pointing to a little tiny pie, and that's an added feature you get with Edelweiss Analytics, where you get to click on that little pie up at the top and switch to this display mode, which is the analytics display mode. And it will just take that group of titles. Now it's going to, if you've got some other publishers' titles in there, it will just show you for your titles within that. So you take your, say you take your catalog, one of your upcoming catalogs or last year's catalog, to do some kind of analysis about how things did last season. You can select that, switch to this mode, and then for whichever store you've got selected, you can switch stores. You'll see their data segmented, but it's also going to show you these titles across the market again. So you've got that same list where you can access the percentage sold, percentage stocked, and all that kind of stuff, and really dig into the details. So it could be a catalog, it could be a collection you put together just to monitor, it could be a promotional collections, or it could be if you've been tagging books a certain way, you could pull together everything with that tag and then analyze that group of titles with the tag on it. So very, very flexible. And really anywhere in Edelweiss you can access this too. Okay, so another feature doesn't really show super well here, but this is kind of going into any book. So I mentioned earlier, again, this is sort of an Edelweiss accessible. So if you have analytics and you look up a title in Edelweiss anywhere, from a catalog, do a search, whatever you want, or in analytics, you're going to have the added option of seeing a cross-store view, we call it, which is, again, you can see that peer information in aggregate, the percentages sold and on hand, but you can also see the fuzzed out part left-hand side where it says store region name. You would see the name of the store, how many they have on hand, how many they have on order, how many they've sold, and you can set the time period for those sales. And so that gives you a huge amount of detail. You can see all of the stores. You can see if you're a sales rep, you probably just have access to the stores that are in your contacts. But at management level, you'll be able to see them all. And you can export that to CSV. So again, for a single title, when something comes out and you just need to know what the heck's happening with it and who's got it and how are things doing, you can just look it up, see this, export it to Excel if you want, and then come back and look it up the next day and see what's happening the next day. And that seems basic, but it's actually a very key feature that lots of publishers that were using our older versions of Edelweiss Analytics used a lot. So finally, I'm going to talk about the idea of sales consulting, which was kind of our fourth bullet on one of those earlier slides. And this is kind of, rather than talk about the application itself, this is kind of a bit more about what you can do with this, or how this really works in practical sense. So we think of it as not only making their jobs easier for reps, but to make it more helpful in their accounts. And what I mean by that is they've got this data-driven kind of system, and call it evidence-based guidance, really. So a rep can really have, I think, a lot more confidence in making recommendations to a buyer, since they have not only data about that store, as I was talking about, but also about their other accounts. And over time, they can really learn more about the characteristics of their store's sales patterns and their customers as well, I think. And that can really, I think, deepen even the trust in the relationship with their customers and help reps to better partner with their accounts just through that kind of knowledge. They can do a better sales presentation with that too, and have a better sense of front list and what really will work for them. So sort of, as I said up here, more nuanced understanding of a store, and but still, again, in both cases, for the bookseller and for a rep, seeing those things, knowing those things that we all know about our stores or our customers that make that store unique, the way that they create the titles, the way that they position things, the kinds of customers that they have, can be reflected in that data. And you want to, or maybe it's not, but you need to sort of combine that data with that knowledge to sort of optimize and get to the best set of titles for them that will work the best for their store. And really what we're just trying to let everybody access that information and not tell them what to do. I guess that's getting at that too. It's like you still have to, everything is unique, publishers are unique, stores are unique, but we want everyone to have the tools, the information and tools right there at their fingertips to make decisions, even if that decision is to not act on a slower turning category, because you could say overall the store might be looking at a particular part of the store and say that's, analytics is saying this is not turning very well, but if that category is integral to the store's reputation, that's fine. They're going to invest a bit more money in inventory there, but they still have the analytics to kind of help them make sure they've got the right titles. But the decision might be a frontless decision to not bring in new titles that are titles that may sell well elsewhere, but they just don't really fit with that store's style or with that store's mission. So yeah, as I mentioned, just one last thing I guess I'll say is it does, and I said this in the last slide, but it does help with selling frontless, because not only can they see what the store hasn't ordered yet, but when it comes to when it comes to selling in a new season, they're really armed with that nuanced information about the characteristics of a store's sales patterns, what they do well with, what kinds of titles they should be. Again, in the sort of conservative side, the kinds of things that maybe they should be conservative about purchasing. So just to recap what we talked about, the things you get, what you can do. You can monitor sales with daily data, so that's mostly from the report, but of course you can go into at any moment and look up a title. Track performances of any list, make a list of promo and so on, create recommendations, so this is more on the rep side, like go in there, see what's happening, pick some titles to recommend, some titles to even recommend to return, and of course gain insights to help you, not just your reps, but everybody to better serve the accounts. So that kind of wraps it up, but if you have any questions, please or do email us at sales@abovethetreeline.com or go over to our website at abovethetreeline.com and fill out an inquiry form, and someone will get in touch with you shortly. And this is available now. We've kind of been rolling this out in phases. We're working. We have booksellers in the UK using it. We have booksellers in the US using this, and we're really just rolling this out to publishers. And we've had, obviously, I mentioned we've had older versions of this, but the key with this is blending Edelweiss Analytics or the analytics tools directly into Edelweiss. So it's kind of a one-stop shopping since everyone's using Edelweiss already, and you're in there, and if you've got this extra analytics module, you can see these extra insights as well. So if you're curious to learn more, proper demo, or just to find out costs and so on, again, sales@abovethetreeline.com or go to our website. Thank you very much for listening.